Hey, I'm Hezekiah.
And I'm Chris.
Welcome to Table Talk, Episode 7. Lately, we've been reviewing Chosen Season 3, but it ended. We're needing some new content, so leave your ideas in the comments down below, like and subscribe, and yeah.
Let's go. All right, so this title, Episode 7, was originally paired together with Episode 8. They put it in the theaters. It was awesome. We watched it in the theaters first, and guys, listen, Dallas, the creator, even said, like, I loved, he was kind of saying, like, Mandalorian, other things like that. Like, do it in the theaters. Like, it's so good seeing it on the big screen first, and so that's what we did. And Episode 7 was called Ears to Hear, and I've been seeing that everywhere. Man, it's just such a good episode, such a good start, or actually really a finish to the season, but a start to the finale. It just was perfect. And so they open up with the disciples and the Jews in Capernaum, which is where primarily most of the set was, and they were celebrating Purim. And so they were talking about the story of Haman and Esther and all of that, and doing all of the cultural and things for the celebration, the food, the stories, all of that. And for whatever reason, we saw this little boy, and he's kind of like pulling on his hair, and he's like doing like this, like making these gestures. And his dad comes over, and is like, "What's going on?" And then they look over and they see Simon Peter, who was just told in the previous episode that they lost the baby, that Eden was 1, pregnant, and 2, lost the baby and almost died while he was away. And he is losing his mind. He like throws some of their like water jug pottery off of the roof. And the thing that I thought about was how different things must have been when you were, kind of having a moment, but the only private, quote unquote, private place you could go to was your own roof, and everyone else got to see and hear everything that's going on. So like, oh, he's a crazy guy talking to himself again, or whatever. And so I appreciated that because you got to see how close everyone lived and how like there was really nothing private. Like basically everyone knew your business, so that was kind of an interesting thing. And so, as an opener, I thought it was cool because you have it's like real life. You had people celebrating while that there are people that are going to be in mourning, people that are going to be facing challenges and having a hard time. And so Peter and Eden were definitely having a hard time at the start of this season. Next up, it shifted, and we're not going to cover all of these in detail. I encourage you to look at the episodes. They are now in the Chosen app. They have separated them into Episode 7 and Episode 8, and so I encourage you to check that out. But one of my favorite scenes, because it gives us more of the backstory of Matthew, and I really liked it, was Mary goes to his house, and she talks about finding these prayer tassels. And she starts asking kind of what it was about, but she also is apologizing. She's like, "I didn't mean to go through your stuff." Well, it kind of set Matthew off a little bit, and we don't often see that in him. And so he like leaves her a little bit, and he's kind of flustered. She's kind of flustered. She's kind of apologetic, and he comes back later. He apologizes. I like a little bit of the lead up because he's got mud everywhere, and she's like, "Whoa, what happened?" And he's like, "Well, when Jesus is alone, he says he prays, so I figured I would do that too. It didn't work out for him." And so, but nonetheless, he still came back. He apologized for the way that he acted, and they kind of bonded a little bit over a moment of she shared more of her story from her past, and he shared more of his story from his past. One of the highlights of his story is the actor that played the old man was from Dallas's Shepherd pilot episode, and I thought that was super cool. The other thing that I thought was really cool about it is, and I don't know if it was the perfect tie-in, but it made me think of it, but it reminded me of the parable of the shrewd businessman. I'll post the link to the scriptures down below. I think that might have been what they were referencing. I don't know for sure, but that's what it reminded me of. And so basically this old man comes to Matthew. I do want to highlight the fact that Matthew was there and Gaius was there. And I want to talk more about Gaius a little bit because y'all know I'm a massive fan of Gaius. And so anyways, but Gaius was there, and this old man comes to check and see if he owes any taxes. And he waited until the end of the day where there were no lines. He kind of was joking a little bit. And I just love him. He's like, the typical Jew telling a story. He's kind of funny as he's doing it, a little bit, kind of old style in the sense of, I don't really care what you think.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved his attitude and the way he talked. But he said that he had no taxes, no fees or anything to pay. And Matthew was actually marveling, like, how did you do this? What's going on? And basically, to simplify it a lot, the guy shifted all of his children's debt into his hands. And so actually, I said that wrong. It wasn't that he had no taxes and fees. Mm-hmm. It's that he didn't have any money to pay the taxes and fees, but the amount of taxes and fees that he had accumulated were so large and so great that Matthew couldn't figure out how it all worked out. Mm-hmm. And what the old man had done is he had taken all of the taxes and fees that his kids and he would owe and put them on his own tab, knowing that he wouldn't live much longer and that his kids would never have to pay again.
Matthew was like, how did you get such a large like debt?
Yes.
And he was explaining how he took all of it.
Yeah.
He knew he wasn't gonna be there for very long. He wanted his kids to live debt free.
Debt free. No, I'm like
that's crazy.
That is awesome. Like I was so floored when I saw it, and then even more so, like Matthew's super smart, and he was like, oh my goodness, I never thought about this. And all that to say, the man was really trying to instill in Matthew a faith. Like, be a man of faith, that I found something that's worth more than anything I ever could have had in the natural, and that's my faith. And he symbolized it in his prayer tassels that he gave to Matthew. And so it was just a neat way to tie Matthew to that, and Mary helped them kind of find that connection. Mm-hmm. She said hers was the dove that pointed her to Jesus and faith, and Matthew's was this old man coming and giving him symbolically his faith. Find what I found, and it's in these prayer tassels.
And she's like, that's basically your dove.
Yes.
Like the old man was basically his dove.
Yeah, it's like, here's your sign. Sometimes God has to wake us up and say, here's a sign because you're being too hard-headed. Like, here, I'm going to help you out. And so I loved this opening. We also get another part of the opening. I'm going to consider this all the beginning of the episode because they were all so quickly thrown out there. But the next one was Andrew and Phillip. They're on the road. They're headed back to the Decapolis. Actually, no. Forgive me. In the last episode, they were in the Decapolis. Now they're headed back, and they're upset because they've made it worse. Mm. And so Phillip is like really upset.
He's losing it.
And in this season, I don't feel like we've had a lot of the other disciples. Most definitely not Andrew, and Andrew is one of my favorites, and so I did like seeing a lot more of Andrew, and I liked their bickering. I mean, that's basically what they were doing. And
I feel like we haven't had a lot of Phillip either.
That's true. And so Phillip is upset because they've made it worse. Andrew is like, he's like, we're going to talk to Jesus either way. So he's kind of like past it. But Phillip gets so upset that he's not watching where he's going. And he trips on this massive like rock sticking out of the ground and busts his toe up. And so then he was like really like not having any. And it's funny because they get to Judas. And Judas is like, okay, so what story did you tell? And they like go through their story, and he's like, oh my goodness. Out of all the stories you could have picked, you picked that one? Yeah. And so they're talking about it. A couple of the other disciples come in, and they talk about it a little bit. They pick on Phillip a little bit more, and he's like, Phillip gets cranky, and he's like, I'm right here, know. Yeah. And so I just, once again, I love when we see the human side of the disciples. Mm-hmm. They get hurt. So he stubbed his toe and he's bleeding everywhere and it's hurting. He's cranky. He's having a little bit of a doubts and worries that, Jesus can't fix it. They've messed it up too bad. Mm-hmm. And I like seeing all of that. And so eventually they tell Jesus, but I like seeing the build up, any thoughts that you have on that I've missed?
I don't think so. I just like seeing how, like when you read it, it's like they went in and went out.
Yes.
It was perfect.
So short.
Yeah. This actually like gives you like a story, like close story, like how it would be like now.
Yeah.
Like human like terms.
Yeah.
Like you aren't perfect. They went in, did what they were supposed to do, but like people took it wrong.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like like they messed up or they weren't perfect. They just took it wrong. And yeah.
Well, and the thing that they had no experience in was they said, well, we went to go tell the Jews.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But there was a mixed crowd, and so they didn't anticipate Gentiles are going to be there too. But isn't it interesting, and this is something I loved about both of these episodes, was the Gentile focus and the fact that the Gentiles were more receptive to it than the Pharisees have been up to this point. They were like, okay, I don't know that I like it, but tell me more. Yeah. And part of the problem in the Decapolis that we find out later on in this episode is the fact that one of the guys like receives the message and then stops doing his duties, and then it causes the whole town to fall into an uproar. So it's like someone got saved basically, and you know, they're not seeing like the fruit, they're just seeing like the turmoil in it. Yeah. And it's like it's so easy for us to get our eyes off of what Jesus is doing and to only feel the pressure and to think that we're doing it wrong or think that we messed it up, when Jesus is probably like, no, you're doing good. Pressure is good. You're going to get pressure, right? Yeah. You know, so I like that. I also like the fact that they were like, let's just talk to Jesus about it. And they're like, I was going to do that anyway. You know, Andrew was like, I was going to do that regardless. So let's go talk to Jesus. And so they all like run out and run to Jesus.
Like Phillip like hesitant kind of?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, he was.
Like what would he think that we messed it up?
Yeah. Yeah, he was more concerned with the fact that they screwed it up. Could Jesus fix it, or would he fix it, or you know, all of those questions, and yeah, I just loved it. You know, he was the one that everybody looked at as like, you've been with John the Baptist, so you've got experience. And the thing that I liked about it is it's like, even though he was with John the Baptist, like I don't think there's anything that could prepare you for what they were going to step into. And so like, hopefully that's encouraging to people that say, well, I don't know enough, or I don't know enough scriptures, or I don't have this. It's like, Jesus just wants somebody who's willing to do it, not somebody who knows everything, you know? And so I like that. I like that they go to Jesus, and as they talk it all out, Jesus is like, oh, you picked that one. And then one of the disciples are like, I don't even really understand it. And then so he describes it to him a little bit more, but it was interesting the way that Jesus was processing with them, because he's like, what did they disagree with in the story? And then they kind of like unpacked it more. But it was the equalization. It was the fact that he wanted Jews and Gentiles. And it caused everybody to be so like awkward of, wait a second, he wants both? He wants his house full, you know, and that's what we're seeing throughout the entire episode in all sorts of different areas. The thing that people are getting hung up on is he wanted everybody. And I loved it. It's so fitting for now, and I'll probably talk about that more. And then Jesus asks John, so they're all going to go to the Decapolis. They make a decision to all go the next morning. And then he asked John for a special mission. And I'm sure John was like, oh, yes, finally, I get my special mission. This is going to be so cool. I'm the one who Jesus loves. And then Jesus is like, I need you to stay behind for Peter. And he was like, what?
His face changed so fast.
Yes, it did.
Like, his face went from like, are you serious?
Yeah, he was mad. Like, this one might have been one of the first times that he was upset with Jesus. And somebody needs to hear that too. Like, Jesus is going to ask us to do stuff that we're not always going to like. And he's a big boy. I mean, he's God, but he's big enough to take care of us being upset and talking it out with him, and people act like you can't. And so some people are probably upset that I said Jesus is a big boy right now, you know, like, oh no, he's not a boy. How dare you, you know? But it's like, understand what I'm saying. Like, he's big enough. He's been God and King long enough, Father long enough, that he understands that we will have discussion, and we should have discussion, because who else can do anything about it? Like, I can argue and whine at you all day, but you can do nothing. And same thing for me. The one that we should be talking to, complaining to, and voicing frustration to is Jesus, because he's the only one who could do anything about it. Yeah. And he's the one who can heal our heart and say, you're wrong, get over it, move on, and I'm going to help you, right? Yeah. And so, like, I love seeing him upset, and Jesus finally is like, Peter's the key, and I want you to do this. And he's like kind of putting his foot down, and John was like, okay. He's not happy about it, but he says yes, right? Then we get the scene the next day when Peter walks in to Matthew's old house. You know, the girls are there getting ready, and he's like, where's everybody? They're like, they went to the Decapolis, and he's like, what? And then Zebedee walks in, and he's kind of Like, dude, what's wrong with you? Did you sleep in? Like, he's kind of nabbing at him a little bit. And Peter gets a little bit fighty. He's like, Zebedee, are you trying to, like, boss me around? Like, are you my dad? Or, it's kind of one of those things that we have all read the story of Peter being kind of hot-headed. But in this regard, think about it. We never understand why is Peter hot-headed. We just assume, okay, he's a fisherman. He's cranky all the time. Like, that's weird. Like, no one who says fishermen are cranky all the time, right? Like, why is Peter upset?
Like,
why does he have that reputation?
Wasn't Zebedee like a fisherman? He wasn't.
Exactly. And he's funny.
Yeah.
And he's like kind of lighthearted, right?
Yeah.
And he's older. And so we tend to stereotype, and we don't really have any dialogue on why. We just see a few things and it's like, oh, he's mad. Or another good one is think about all the times that people have said doubting Thomas. Well, everything we've seen thus far, he's not doubting. He has one time that he's like, and then everybody gives him that answer. And so in this regard, we're seeing a stressed out, grieving, frustrated Peter, and everybody is just like, hothead Peter, he's mad all the time, so I don't know. I think it was funny. I liked the little bit of bickering, and then John comes in and he's looking for Peter, and he's like, Dad, I got this. Abba, I've got this, kind of thing. And so you can see Zebedee kind of processing a little bit. He was frustrated. He's like, I've known you since you were in diapers, basically. Like, dude, come on. And so we see a little bit of that tension. And I like it because it shows how close they were. Yeah. Like we said a minute ago, how the houses were close, the neighborhoods were close, how close they were as family. But almost the next scenes later, we see Zebedee, his wife Salome, and Mary go and talk to Eden. Like, hey, intervention. Something's wrong with Peter. Something must be wrong with you. What's going on? And they have this mini moment where I think Salome and Mary realize that something is going on and it's not something she's going to say in front of Zebedee. He leaves and she talks about the miscarriage. Zebedee sees the evidence outside of the house of the broken pottery. And it's starting to kind of sink in, like, I'm not dealing with a family that is just being angry and mad. I'm dealing with a family that's grieving. And I just loved the way that they kind of like walked through that. And my favorite thing that Mary said, she's like, I don't understand your situation. And I think we need to like start talking like this. I don't understand your situation. But a similarity that I can see that I didn't do is I think you need to grieve. I think you need to mourn, and it's okay to fall apart and let Jesus take care of it, right? And so I started seeing that more and more in this episode and the next few scenes that followed, is that Eden finally comes to terms with the grief that she's feeling and really places it in God's hands. So I appreciated that. What else did you see in either of these two?
I thought it was cool seeing when they both came into the house to talk to Mary. Like, you could see that they had like discernment. Yeah. And they could like sense something.
They actually cared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool to see.
Oh, that's good. I agree with that. It's not only the years of marriage speaking, but just that discernment of something's not right, and we need to ask. We need to figure it out. And I just love that. It's like, if you aren't a part of a family and a community that cares about you that way, we need to be. That's the way the church needs to be. Hey, what's going on? And not for judgment, not for you're bad and you're wrong or anything like that. It's like, how can we help? We know you so well. Talk to us, And
I liked how, since they were so close with Peter, like Zebedee was kind of like the father figure to Peter. Yeah. So like they were kind of brothers.
That's right.
Like he was like the father.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I agree with that. Peter, James, and John were very brotherly. Yeah. And Zebedee and Salome were very much mother and father. I agree with that. That was totally evident, not only in this, but to Kaya's point, because the scriptures tend to be so quick in the details that you don't piece all of that together. And so seeing the fact that they are like stepping in as family, they are like, concerned and showing that, you see that mother and father heart there. And I think that also helped. Yeah. At first, I was worried about Mary going along because it's like, oh, what's she going to think? Is she going to say anything? But then you see her concern, too, of like, I don't know what's going on, but I care, So I like that. And I like them using Mary in this way of someone who's gone through such immense pain and trial help somebody else with the healing process. I thought that was important. And so she's growing from her previous season where she thought she wasn't good enough and wasn't valuable and all of that. And then after her reconciliation with Tamar, it's like it was so cool to see her jump in and say, hey, let's make sure everybody else is healed and doing good. So I like that. So my favorite scene or storyline in this entire season, some people are not going to like me for this, but because you might say a number of other things. I just love the Peter and Gaius storyline. Them fixing the well, Peter having what he considered at first to be marital issues that ended up turning into family and children issues. But we see the beginnings of Peter being more and more content with Gentiles, specifically Romans, when initially he was so angry at Matthew for being a tax collector and working with the Romans that he was like, you're a traitor, you're not even a Jew. I mean, he was like so angry with him. And then we see this shift to where I don't know that he liked it initially, but then he started seeing that Gaius is not the regular guy. And so I love that. Then we see Peter kind of like in a dazed and confused kind of state, grieving, and he finds himself in a place that a Jew does not want to find themselves. He according to him, stumbled. I don't know how this happened. They didn't show us, but he stumbles into the Roman quarter, which is usually on guard, and everybody's looking at him weird, and we're like, what's going on? And then he says it, and then this Roman guard comes up to him and is like about to lose him and take him to jail. And then who but Gaius waltzes up and basically saves the day. Yeah. I mean, he reprimands him for him. He's like, what are you thinking? Like, this is the dumbest thing you could do. And he's like, why don't you go to a bar or something? Like, seriously? You know, do you want to die? But here's what's interesting. And I think this further proves my point. I'm still going to hold on to this. I could be wrong. But we see Gaius's house. We meet his wife. We meet his son, and we meet none other than the servant boy that we've been talking about this entire time. We hear his wife say, is this the Jewish healer? So not only that, Gaius is talking about Jesus at his home. Like, I'm just floored by this. She gets him a cloak, and this is my favorite line out of Gaius in the entire episode, because up to this point, we've seen everything on the contrary in the Pharisees. And she gets the cloak for him to kind of disguise him, and she wouldn't hand it to him. It's like, ooh, germs, nasty. And he's like, they're Jews. They're not, whatever. But he's like, you're not going to catch anything. Like, are you serious? And so he grabs it, hands it to Peter. It's like, I love it because he's like, in the previous episodes, he was wanting to help the sick guy that was coughing there. He's moving their fireplaces so they could cook. He's helping them fix their tent. So he's like legitimately living out the fact that they can work together. Whereas the Pharisees up to this point are like, you don't want to eat with them. You don't want to hang around them. You don't want to be anywhere near them because you'll catch something bad. Yeah. Right. And I love seeing that play out and how Gaius is doing. And then as they're leaving, Peter asks him about the boy. And he's like, what's going on? And Gaius basically comes out and says, he's my son. I can't pretend any longer. He's my kid. And I'm like, whoa, okay. Like, the plot is really getting thick now. And just a sidebar, I think he's the centurion with great faith. I think the servant that is going to get healed is his kid. And it adds so much more depth to it. He's a centurion with great faith. And so that story is found in Matthew 8 as well as Luke 7. I think it's him, and they even capped out the entire episode, which is in episode 8, with seeing him laying over the boy and kind of like touching him and kind of having a moment. Like Gaius is at his wit's end. His son's not getting better. The doctors aren't doing anything. One, they're like, ew, it's scum. He's a servant, so we don't know if we want to help him. But two, they're not able to do anything. And so Gaius is on the verge. I think season 4 is going to open up or have a major point of the healing and the great faith statement by Jesus. And so I'm ready. Gaius is my dude. I'm so ready. And so that was so good to see. And then the episode actually finishes out with many of the disciples and Jesus being in the Decapolis. They meet Leander, Telemachus, and his father. Telemachus is a young boy, and his father is deaf and unable to speak. So he's never had any hearing before, and he couldn't speak. He couldn't get out any words. And they just kind of come out with boldness, and they say, they rush to Jesus, and he says, Jesus, can you heal my son? Can you heal my dad? And Leander and the others are like, this is not why we're here. And Jesus is basically like, why else am I here? And he goes and he heals him, and he's like, what's that? What? He starts kind of talking, and he's like, what's that sound? And he's like, that's birds. And one of the disciples is like, I can't even hear that. And so, we get that. And then Jesus, they say like, hey, we can't pay you for anything. What do we need to do? And Jesus is like, I charge you only this. Don't tell anybody. Yeah. And you've had a lot of practice keeping your mouth quiet. And it's like, oh, Jesus got the little joke in there too, So it's like, I love the human side of things. And so Jesus threw out a joke. They all laughed. And then the episode kind of wraps up. Peter and John arrive. I would say this is my favorite scene, part 2. Peter and John on their way. John is really digging into Peter. He's mad. He's mad that he waited. He's mad that he's been cranky. He doesn't understand.
Never showed up to any of the meetings they've had.
He never shows up to any of their stuff. Like, dude, what is wrong with you? And then Peter just breaks and tells them that they lost the baby. Now, the other thing that I think people tend to get upset about is Peter was upset. Like, he was mad at Jesus. And here's what I thought was beautiful about it. Never once did he say he wasn't the Christ. Never once did he say he was unable to do it. What he was mad about is he's doing it for everybody except for me. Why can't he do it for me? I'm someone that is following him and loving him. Why isn't he doing it for me?
And, you see that, most of the time, whenever he's, there to heal someone, you can kind of see that he already knows.
Yeah.
But I think he's, kind of confused as well. If he can tell that he knows something about another person, how can you not tell just by looking at, us?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's like, he hasn't said anything? He hasn't done anything? Like, what in the world is going on?
One of the episodes, I don't remember which one it was, when they were there, and she was acting weird, you can kind of tell that Peter and Andrew kind of, not Peter and Andrew, Jesus and Andrew.
Yes, Jesus and Andrew.
Kind of saw. And didn't Phillip's, kind of tell as well? I forgot who it was.
I think it was Matthew.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew and Jesus.
Yeah,
all were which I think Jesus 100% knew.
Yeah.
But, did you notice that even in the midst of all of it, neither Peter, which Peter didn't really know what was going on, but neither Peter nor Eden said, Jesus, I'm grieving. This is what's happened. They didn't even talk to him about it. They just assume he knows he's Jesus. And how often are we that way? I don't need to pray. God already knows. No, you need to pray. You need to talk to Jesus. How weird is it to say, well, Hezekiah is my son. He already knows how I feel about him. I'm never going to talk to him again. Yeah. That's silly.
What that reminds me of is how they're assuming that he knows. It kind of reminds me of Charlie Shamp was at Awaken. Yeah. He kept saying ask.
Shameless plug.
Yeah. Awaken. You, James, and Charlie kept saying ask.
Yeah. Ask him.
Yeah, just ask, talk.
Yeah.
Talk to him.
Yeah. No, I agree. I saw a lot of that in this episode is they just not knowing what he would say. I think they were worried that he would say no, maybe. I don't know. But it's no one asked. No one talked about it, And so I say all that to say I loved seeing Peter mad. He was mad at Jesus, genuinely mad at Jesus. And you're like, what? Are you serious? It's yeah, because it's real life. How often do you experience things, or have you experienced things, or people that we love, their kids die, their family members die. They're genuinely mad. Once again, I go back to, I can be mad at you all I want to, but that doesn't solve anything. Jesus is the only one that can solve anything, and he's able to handle our frustration. The only other thing I'll say, because we're about to jump into the episode 8 recap, is Shmuel is on his way. He's told that Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter, is in the Decapolis, and he rounds up the guys, and he's on his way. And initially, there's a twist, but initially I'm like, oh no, not this guy. Like, the only guy that's worse than Shmuel up to this point was the guy who consistently has the angry look on his face all the time. That's the only guy that's worse. Yeah. And so I was like, oh no, Shmuel's on his way. What's going to happen?
That's a wrap for episode 7.
And if you want to catch the next episode, the review of episode 8, make sure to click here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can do that right here. We'll see you next time.